This podcast is recorded primarily in Stratford, Ontario. Stratford is on the territory of the Anishinaabe-Wakim, Atitiwanderunk neutral, and Mississauga's land. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties, notably the Huron Tract Purchase. This new business acknowledges this history of the land and strives to be an ally to the Indigenous peoples of Canada, who have suffered through systemic racism, causing intergenerational trauma. I urge you to be aware of the path of truth and reconciliation that is ongoing in this country, which was fought for in the largest class action lawsuit against the Canadian federal government. Stemming from this lawsuit, thousands of children have been discovered buried at residential schools, the last of which closed in 1996. Want to know on three? 1, 2, 3.
Want to know?
Hit it.
And bonjour. You're listening to the official 1-0 Fantasy Football Podcast. It's time to join your host, the Commissioner Extraordinaire, the Fantasy Football Trade Monger, Owen, Odog, Drake.
Welcome to another edition of 1-0 Fantasy Football, where you're the one and I'm the O. Today, the one is also Mr. Josh Klein. Do y'all remember Josh? Don't you worry yourselves for a sweet minute, because I've got myself an intro to reuse. Introducing a former Canadian high school tight end out of LaSalle, Ontario. Backup to former Seahawk Luke Wilson, my Colts partner in crime, the hardest man to trade with in fantasy football, the man, the myth, the legend, Josh Klein. Josh, how the hell are you?
Odog, how you doing, man? Excited to be on the podcast.
Josher, excited to have you, my friend. So I heard there's some big news in Josh land too. A short little 10-minute commute to work.
Oh, yeah. It's like night and day, man. Yeah, it's been great. Was commuting for a while there, living the commuter life, about 2 hours a day. Now been able to find something a lot closer. So a lot more free time, which is great. Quality life is up.
Well, that's great to hear. And I mean, it was a new job and a new position, and it's not just the 10-minute commute that kind of, but I guess that's kind of the headline when you spend less of your time in a car just driving and you get more time back in your life. Time is money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it was so a different organization. I was basically accepted the job I was doing, the commute, but kind of keeping one eye on the present, one eye on the future, applying to jobs in the area to see if anything would come up. But something came up, fortunately, and I took advantage of the opportunity, and now I got a position. It's a similar role, but with another organization and just a lot less of a commute. So yeah, it's nice because I think anyone that commutes can agree that you feel there's a chunk of your day that's just missing every day, and your days seem a lot shorter. So getting back close to around an hour and a half a day is pretty big for me, in terms of, things that I like to do in my spare time or things that I'm working towards.
Yeah, and speaking of those things that you're working on in your spare time and working towards, you got your DJ/music creation sort of conglomerate, let's say. But I had a note in here that I definitely want to get that SoundCloud link from you and get that shared out to listeners. But how goes the music creation process?
It's good. It's good. No, yeah. It's a conglomerate is probably a good way of putting it, because I started off DJing and loved that. And my cousin, now it's funny, my cousin is getting into DJing, and it's making me want to start DJ and making mixes again. But I would say producing is the main focus. I haven't been able to do much the last 3 weeks, probably, just because like starting the new job and going through that transition process. But I think this is the first stable week that I'm having now coming up. So I'm really looking forward to getting back into it. But yeah, I love doing it, making music. I have my SoundCloud, and I also have that tutorial channel on YouTube as well. But yeah, probably SoundCloud. The SoundCloud link is probably the best one to put out there. If anyone wants to hear any mixes that I've made and any songs that I make in the future, I'll be putting on that as well. So I'll be a good link and resource to have if anyone likes that kind of music.
Yeah, and maybe we can kind of feature it at the end or something like that of one of these pods as well, because I mean, a little bit of give and take here, a little bit of give and take.
That'd be sweet, dude.
And it's funny that you mentioned too, like finally getting a little bit of a breather, because it seems like it might be that kind of time. Maybe it's just for the people that I'm talking to right now, but for my job, we're in between projects right now. So it's a bit of a downtime and it's a bit of an adjustment. And you're saying that, you know, your time's starting to free up. And I'm going to be talking to Fusco on the next podcast, but actually talked to him yesterday. So that's kind of bending my mind a little bit right now, but his season for the Manitoba Moose in the AHL just ended. So, I mean, he's on his big break and they're all kind of moving in slow motion, he was saying. So, I mean, let's not channel that in. We're going to move to a new section and we're going to start building the fire for this podcast. We're going to set the table to ease into the football. And I think we're going to need a podcast fire starter. Build the fire right, and they will come.
Yeah. You got to like set the kindling.
Podcast fire starter.
I feel started.
So Tom Brady retired and then unretired. What the what? So let me lead y'all. If you haven't been plugged into the NFL this offseason, let me lead y'all through a little bit of a timeline into what the what. So Saturday, January 29th, reports of Tom Brady's retirement start popping up. On Monday, January 31st, Tom Brady appears on the Sirius XM Let's Go podcast and says he hasn't decided yet. Legitimately, the next day, Tom Brady officially retires. So it seems to me that the news was broken and Tom Brady wanted to control the narrative on his own retirement. And, you know, Josh and I are both Colts fans, and I personally don't let that bleed into fantasy football, but obviously, this is going to affect my opinion of Tom Brady as the rivalry over the years, but I was super annoyed with this just whole process, and it just seemed to keep getting more annoying and more annoying. But anyways, we thought we were finally done with Brady. He officially retires, and the big controversy was that his retirement post neglected to mention the Patriots, which was immensely enjoyable. Let's get Patriot Nation kind of roused up here. Then 2 days later, he posts a farewell video and a quote. I played for the name on the front of my jersey and the name on the back of my jersey. I played for my friends, my family, and our community. Every single one of you that have given me what I have today. I love you all. Thank you all for making this incredible journey possible. So this is February 3rd. By February 8th, Brady's not ruling out a return. We fast forward 1 month into March, and Brady's seen at a soccer game, and I think it was Ronaldo, but I can't be sure. Soccer's not really my forte, but you see him up in the stands, and tweets roll out with images of him in the stands, and he's not looking enthused, and it's like Brady's first game in the stands after retirement, not really enjoying the process, eh? And March 13th, we're I think 2 days away from free agency at that point, Josh, and Brady changes his mind. He unretires and with this quote, these past 2 months, I've realized my place is still on the field and not in the stands. That time will come, but it's not now. I love my teammates. I love my supportive family. They make it all possible. I'm coming back for my 23rd season in Tampa. Unfinished business, LFG. And I can't go with LFG. Let's go with let's freaking go for the purposes of this podcast. And then another note that I just wanted to include as well is within a couple weeks after that, in a suspicious amount of time after Tom Brady returns, because it leads to questions. It's almost like we've set up 2 weeks to wait on this next announcement. Bruce Arians retires from coaching and hands the Buccaneers over to Todd Bowles to be the head coach and run the defense. And that would mean Byron Leftwich, who Tom Brady seemed to gel with really well last year. And
yeah, he was head coaching candidate as well.
Head coaching candidate. And there were reports that even they set up their game plan and Bruce would come in and just scrap it or whatever. And they quelled sort of the reports of dysfunction within there. But anyways, Bruce Arians retires, moves into a front office role with the Buccaneers, and speculation runs rampant that Brady forced him out. Arians comments and says, quote, "We have a great relationship. All of the players, every one of them has gotten cussed out, including him. That's just part of me. People got to write stuff." Couldn't be further from the truth. And I just wanted to throw one other note in here as well about Arians, because I think I've mentioned it on the podcast before, but Arians is just such a trailblazer for diversity in the league. When they asked him questions about, his coaching staff, and his quote was, and I'm going to replace the swear word in here as well, but I really didn't do stuff. So he left a legacy to the coaches, that he helped to move forward in the league. He has 4 black assistants, and Todd Bowles, Byron Leftwich, Keith Armstrong, Harold Goodwin, and 2 women on his coaching staff, Lori Locust, the assistant defensive line coach, and Maral Javidifar, the assistant strength and conditioning coach. So Bowles is now the head coach, Leftwich offensive coordinator, Armstrong is the special teams coordinator, and Goodwin is the assistant head coach. Arians has truly been a trailblazer for diversity in the industry, but we're going to move back to Brady, unless, Josh, I know Arians also holds a special place in your heart. So comments.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Bruce Arians, you can't forget what he did in Indianapolis. And that always stays true with me. Obviously the season where Chuck Pagano got diagnosed with cancer and had to go on leave. You had Bruce Arians fill in interim head coach, and he did a phenomenal job. And you definitely saw the potential for a head coaching role for him. Bruce gets hired at Arizona, and then the rest is history. He has his time in Arizona, and then, but I do think I think Bruce Arians has had those questions with his health, and he's been open about that. And I think that's led to him he had a retirement at Arizona, and then he took a couple of years off, and then he's come back to Tampa Bay. And now it looks like he's trying to just stay in the game by going to the front office. He'll probably still have some influence and some overwatch with the organization, but Todd Bowles, more than ready, right? He's already had a couple opportunities at head coaching. I think now with Bruce Arians staying in-house, that'll help Todd Bowles too. But interesting timing with the Tom Brady unretiring, and then 2 weeks later, Bruce Arians retiring from his role at least. But yeah, love Bruce Arians and wishing him nothing but the best there.
Yeah. And love Bruce, and especially for fantasy too, as we can kind of segue back in towards kind of the podcast topic here too. But Bruce runs an offensive system where it just makes quarterbacks explode. They have a crazy amount of interceptions usually in their first year in the system as they try to adjust to more of the downfield shots. And like you said, Andrew Luck, Carson Palmer, and now Tom Brady, they kind of all went through the same thing. And back in the day, even Ben Roethlisberger, but definitely has his fingers and impacts all around the league. But now we have the annoying unretirement of Tom Brady, lasted a month, and can't say that it's surprising, but I can say that as a Colts fan, I am immediately a 10 out of 10 in the annoyance scale. But he did it was a calculated move where he unretired right before the beginning of free agency. So it was good timing for the Bucs to make their decisions. They had lost both guards during Brady's retirement. So Ali Marpet, he retired, and he actually ended up staying retired after Brady's unretirement. And then Alex Kappa was a free agent, and he actually left and signed with the Cincinnati Bengals. But they were able to replace at least one of these positions with a trade where they brought in Shaq Mason for a 5th round pick. They just fleeced the Patriots. Like, why are the Patriots just helping out an ex Super Bowl champion with a starting right guard is one of my questions. But then they bring back Chris Godwin on a 3-year, $60 million contract. Russell Gage of the Falcons signs in free agency. Leonard Fournette resigns. And I mean, at this point, it feels inevitable that Rob Gronkowski will resign, but it just seems like he's avoiding all of the offseason workouts as well. And then I did mention that they replaced their other starting guard in the second round, a guard, Luke Gadecki, to solidify that offensive line with remaining starters, Donovan Smith, Ryan Jensen, Tristan Wirfs. And then also of note, they drafted Rachaad White, a running back, in the third round. And he's described as a smooth slasher at 6 feet, 214 pounds, runs a 4.4 40-yard dash, and best comparable per player profiler.com to David Johnson. So, I mean, keep an eye on this guy, and 43 receptions last year as well. So this Bucs offense is shaping up again. Eh, Josh?
Yeah, no, for sure. I don't think they're taking their foot off the gas. And I think Tom Brady unretiring is just further being a catalyst for that mindset and not at all entering a rebuild. I mean, you look at some of their star players and they're still really young. So I think they still have a ceiling that they want to reach. I think Tom Brady staying there is allowing them to continue to chase that. I think did they draft a quarterback this draft? I don't think they did.
No, they drafted one last year, second round pick Kyle Trask, who was projected to take over this offense and then was passed the torch and then, psych, we'll take that back.
Right. Yeah. Tom Brady, he couldn't handle that, I guess. But no, I mean, to be honest, the Patriots, I think in terms of like what they did in their trading for Shaq Mason, like I think the Patriots have always had kind of a trend of being completely unemotional with their decisions and organization. So like, I think they just want the picks, like I think of Bill Belichick making those decisions, like especially with the departure of Brady and everything and how unemotional they approach it. I think that's their gig. That's how they've always operated. But sometimes it doesn't make the most sense in terms of sending a starting guard right there. And, but, to each their own. In terms of, the Bucs, I think they are still primed to make another run. And I also think it's interesting, you think of Bruce Arians, like the David Johnson comparison reminds me of Bruce Arians in Arizona when they drafted him. Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe BA had some say in that as well. I saw a similar body type, saw, some similarities between the two.
Yeah.
So,
and watching the draft, you can see Bruce Arians front and center there, still like right in the center of all the action and everything, getting his say in there. And it's good. It's good that he's still involved in the NFL. The NFL is definitely a better place with Bruce Arians in it. But we're going to shift back to fantasy now. We're going to touch on some of the starters for the Bucs. You said they're primed for a run. They definitely are. And that means they're primed for some fantasy football gold as well. So we're going to start at the quarterback position. Brady was probably, if not for Jalen Hurts, the best late round quarterback last year. And this year, heading into the year, he's currently being drafted as the quarterback 12, around 88th overall in the 7th round. He's after Matt Stafford, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, Jalen Hurts. And I think that all mostly makes sense as we head into Brady's age 45 year. But I mean, he always ends up in those top 5 quarterbacks in this system. So it's hard to draft him after all of these guys, especially with the inconsistency of Stafford, especially with Rodgers losing his number 1, especially with Russell Wilson usually being up and down. But I mean, you got him on the Broncos, and now Brady's before Deshaun Watson, Trey Lance, Kirk Cousins, and Derek Carr. So I think his spot makes sense. You could bump him up a little higher, but seems like a draft day value again, where you can just slot in a very consistent quarterback and he's still got his weapons and you're ready to roll.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the fact that, you always say quarterback's best friend is tight end, running backs that can receive. So I think the drafting of that 3rd round running back, if he catches steam quickly, we've seen Tom Brady we know how much he utilizes his running backs. I mean, look no further than how he did in in New England. What was that running back that he just constantly just spattered with targets?
James White.
Thank you. We saw James White's fantasy value go up huge. So I actually would even say, I think probably that third round running back, if Tom Brady's there, maybe a sleeper pick, because that guy's going to get targets. If he comes out and he gets the starting role, he could have some serious fantasy value.
Absolutely. And that segues perfectly into my next note here. So Fournette is currently being drafted as running back 13, start of the third round. And I was telling Josh before we started rolling on the podcast here that I've already started doing mock drafts and being a bit of a psycho that way, but that's totally fine. You got to get your reps in, got to get those bench presses in, just like the actual athletes. But I'm here to help all of y'all. So I've started research, started drafting, but Fournette, running back 13. So he's just outside of those running back ones. You can, in the start of the third round, you can have him as your running back 2. You could even have him as your running back 3 if you go 3 running backs in a row. For context, he's after Javonte Williams, Nick Chubb, Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley. And I think there's an argument to be made to take him ahead of all of those guys, where Javonte Williams has Melvin Gordon cannibalizing, Nick Chubb has Kareem Hunt cannibalizing, Alvin Kamara might be suspended. Saquon Barkley's been a disappointment. And he's before Aaron Jones, Cam Akers, Antonio Gibson, Zeke, and Josh Jacobs. So you're kind of in this zone where it's like you want to take a shot. And Fournette has been fantastic in this offense. He had 69 receptions last year. And Josh, before I bring you back in on Fournette here, I wanted to put a quote in here because per Tampa Bay Times, Bucs running backs coach Todd McNair said that Fournette struggled with missed assignments and running the wrong routes last season. Quote, he's got a habit for ad-libbing, and that can get him into trouble, doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, and he ends up in the wrong place a lot. Like we said, probably led to the decision to draft Rachaad White, who caught 43 passes for 456 yards as a senior. And so my advice is to draft Fournette high and watch for White's involvement to start to grow. And then you're going to want to trade Fournette at the appropriate spike in his value.
It's a good call, man. That's a good piece of advice, because you're right. It's hit and miss whether or not someone that's drafted can take a starting role right off the bat. So I think it's probably smart to, if you can, it's about finding that right timing, right? Where you start to see reps increase for that rookie. I would say to also follow along with training camp and see what is being reported in terms of who's getting starting reps, because that is actually pretty telling. It's obviously in the context of the team. I know at least for some teams, you hear head coaches just saying, we like to give everyone an assortment of starting reps because we want to see everyone with the starters to get it. So that might not be indicative of if they're looking at them legitimately in a starting role, but something to definitely look into for the Bucs.
Yeah. And I mean, I was just quickly looking it up on Fantasy Pros, and Rachaad White's even being drafted in the 12th round, according to what they have on their site right now. And mind you, that's with a lot of these fantasy professional and, experts in the space drafting right now, where they're doing best ball leagues, and that kind of forces at best ball. And these experts, they force these rookies up, and it's rookie fever season right now too. So we'll have to keep an eye on where he is. But at this point, like, you're probably going to be watching week 1. And, Bruce Arians was famous for not starting rookies in year 1. David Johnson even had to wait for a year. So I would let other people draft Rachaad White and then scoop him up kind of halfway through the season. Like we said, when we see that spike in value. But we're going to quickly touch on the wide receivers because we want to hit into the Colts portion of our podcast today. So you got Mike Evans. He's currently being drafted as wide receiver 11 in the mid-3rd round, after players like CeeDee Lamb, A.J. Brown, Keenan Allen, but before players like T. Higgins, Deontay Johnson, Jalen Waddle. It feels like there's a bit of almost name fatigue with Evans, but he always has 1,000 yards. I think we've all heard that crazy stat where it's like every year since he's been in the league, he's hit that 1,000 yard mark. Bang, 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 bang. And he's that huge receiver that gets a lot of touchdowns and red zone targets. Then you've got Chris Godwin. He's currently being drafted at wide receiver 19th in the mid 4th, despite his injury. So you're going to have to make that investment, not knowing, well, obviously we're going to get more news between now and August, but you might not have him for a couple weeks. And he's being drafted after Terry McLaurin, Amari Cooper, but before Pittman, who we'll get into in a couple minutes, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Marquise Brown, who we talked about, or who you will hear more about tomorrow as Anthony and I discuss him, and Michael Thomas and Jerry Jeudy. So enter Russell Gage, who was signed as a free agent. He's being drafted as wide receiver 49 at the start of the 10th round, and he could hold some crazy value during sort of a Godwin slow start injury return. And it's notable that Tampa Bay took 0 wide receivers in this draft and signed Gage to a 3-year, $30 million contract. Wow. And Gage last year, I found this tweet. I'm not sure by what metric we're going by, but he was more efficient than Stephon Diggs and DK Metcalf in 2021. So I think you definitely want to pay attention to Russell Gage in fantasy drafts going forward. It's really important to have a strong start in fantasy. And it's kind of one of the things that I want to start emphasizing, it where we break the season down into almost quarters and you just want to win each quarter. And Russell Gage can help you with that first sort of start to the year, get off to a strong start. And Brady's going to be hyper targeting Evans and Gage.
It's a good call, man. And it's honestly, it's a smart way of looking at it. That's actually how football teams look at it, is they compartmentalize the season into 4 quarters. I think that's a little awkward now. Now, isn't there 17 games in the NFL season?
Yeah,
so it's not like they could be like 4 games a quarter.
And it takes away the measure of mediocrity.
Yes.
Where it's like, you can't have 8-8 teams anymore.
I know.
I think that's a little ridiculous. We got to add one more game. We need some more football.
It's going to be so awkward. I think they will probably add it eventually, but yeah, right now we're just stuck in that awkward stage.
Absolutely. So this went on a little long for a quick question, but we are going to segue effortlessly and seamlessly into a section about the Colts. But first, let's take a quick break and hear from our sponsors. Hamlin Knives, handcrafted in Canada. With over 1,000 followers on Instagram, Chris Hamlin of Hamlin Knives has work that speaks for itself. Chris is his own biggest critic while producing his knives that are honestly incredible works of art and can often be found in his natural habitat working on his knives. To see more of his work and his family, including viewing a commercial that his knives have been featured in, as well as countless pics of his incredible stock removal knives handcrafted here in Huron County, Ontario, Canada, search Hamlin Knives on Instagram. That's HAMELINKNIVES on Instagram. Need more knives? Consider the Great Lakes Custom Knife Show in Bayfield, Ontario, Saturday, August 20th, 2022 at the Bayfield Town Hall, located at 11 The Square, Bayfield, Ontario. This event is from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. for only a $5 entry fee. You can follow Great Lakes Custom Knife Show on Instagram or Facebook for more information, or head over to greatlakescustomknifeshow.com for more information regarding this event, or to see the incredible list of over 20 knife makers, a leather crafter, and even a stabilized and hybrid handle material maker. Be sure to let Chris or anyone at the Great Lakes Custom Knife Show that you heard about it here on the 1-0 Fantasy Football Podcast. Snob-free art for everyone. That's the goal of Brock Jones and his art. As a professional artist, Brock has met with the critics and the artistes who talk about juxtaposition and dichotomy when viewing art, and does not create art for them or try to sound anything like them. Brock aims to create art for everyone who likes the look or the feeling they get from looking at his paintings. Though he is trained in fine arts, graphic design, and animation, you don't need an art degree to enjoy his art or figure out what it means. His focus is on vibrant, eye-catching colors, exaggerated proportions, and attention to detail that aims to have something new for the viewer every time they look at it. He is inspired by what surrounds him and what inspiration strikes at any time. The look of a building as he walks by, the light in that field as he passes, or that person's character coming through in a photo. Born and raised in Toronto, Ontario, Brock has lived all across Canada. He now calls Goderich, Ontario, his home with his wife and 2 daughters, who serve as his inspiration literally and figuratively. Having tried career paths from groundskeeper to cop, Brock has always come back to the realization that he is meant to share his artistic talent with as many people as he can. Snob-free art for everyone. More than a motto, it is the way that the art is created. Brock Jones' art is created for everyone to enjoy at a price that doesn't require a bank loan. This art isn't a social commentary or a deep dive into the inner workings of the psyche. Pretty pictures at a fair price. Visit brockjonesart.ca today. That's BROCKJONESART.ca to browse snob-free art for everyone, to view more information about commissioning a custom piece of art, or to contact the artist Brock Jones himself. If you have an idea, fill out the form on his website and they'll be sure to make it happen. And when you buy your first piece of snob-free art, be sure to let Brock know that you heard about him on here first, on the 1-0 Fantasy Football Podcast. Welcome back. Freedom, your Matt-esty. I've been repeating that in my head in that kind of voice since I wrote it, just because I puns are kind of in if we're going to be kind of like that on this 100%. Podcast. But Matt Ryan was granted his freedom from the Atlanta Falcons after they rolled out the proverbial red carpet grossly for Deshaun Watson. And I'm going to set the table for this Colts discussion as Chris Ballard. My man, Chris Ballard out there wheeling and dealing. So the last time that you heard from this podcast about the Colts, Josh and I were sitting here discussing, oh no, we don't have a quarterback, but hooray, we have traded away our problem, Carson Wentz, to the stupidly named Washington Commanders. And we received 2 third-round picks in return from the Commanders in their desperation. And then Chris Ballard waits, and sends only a third-round pick to the Atlanta Falcons for Matt Ryan.
Yeah, well, what a way the tale ended, in a sense. Like, we were so perplexed and confused and wondering what was going to happen, just stuck in wonder. And I think it was honestly a sign of the maturation of Chris Ballard as a GM, because
wait, was that another pun there?
Maybe.
The maturation.
I think maybe in his first or second year as GM may have panicked and traded 2 third-round picks for a quarterback right away after they had traded away Carson Wentz, because when you're a young GM and you're not used to that, and you hear the fan community freaking out, and you hear the press saying what the press is saying, and everyone asking what they're asking, it can lead to you being influenced. But I think Chris Ballard showed a lot of restraint. I also think he showed a lot of smarts to refer to, Jim Irsay, who's been there, done that. This guy was an assistant. He was, the water boy at one point when he was following his dad and in the organization. Then he was a GM. So he's been there every step of the way. So he leaned on him for support. And I think Jim Irsay was like, stay patient, don't force it. Trust that whatever is the best solution for us will come to us. And that's exactly what happened. They saw an opportunity, seized it when it came up. When Atlanta attempted to roll out a red carpet for Deshaun Watson, a slimy red carpet just on the floor for Deshaun. Yeah. But that kind of blew up in their face too, didn't it? Because Deshaun didn't even end up going there.
No, he didn't. They ended up with being left at the altar with Marcus Mariota, which is interesting, and then drafting a quarterback. But yeah, you make a good point. Jim Irsay wanted Carson Wentz gone. Yeah. We talked about the 2 a.m. tweets on the last podcast as well. And I mean, yeah, like we said, the timeline was interesting to live, where we got rid of Wentz pretty immediately, capitalizing on that desperation, but then didn't show desperation ourselves. So Carson Wentz is gone, gained an extra third pick from it, and got an upgrade at quarterback. It sounds like, from the reports that are already coming out from the Colts, you're getting quotes of Matt Ryan can put the ball anywhere he wants to. His accuracy is out of this world. And we're talking about a quarterback that essentially hyper targeted and created. Okay, mind you, Julio Jones we're not taking anything away from his talent, but I'm in the firm belief that a quarterback makes the wide receiver a little bit more than the wide receiver makes the quarterback. It's, the ball still has to be there for the wide receiver to make these amazing moves, but you've got Julio Jones and now you've got Michael Pittman, both of these big boys that can just go up and bully people and grab the balls. And
you mean Alec Pearson in Michael Pittman, right?
No, I meant Julio Jones to Michael Pittman, where
I see.
We're talking for fantasy and for real life, where Matt Ryan feels the pressure and he's just going to throw it to Pittman. And the fact that we've got Michael Pittman set up as this big body receiver, it kind of segues perfectly into the emphasis where Chris Ballard had made a real big point this offseason to emphasize athleticism, first of all, but mostly height, where a lot of teams are emphasizing the speed on the field. And that's all well and fine, but it seems like the teams that overemphasize speed were exposed during the season, where we had that cover 2 shell defense that all of the announcers were talking about that countered the speed by having the safeties pulled back. And now it seems like Chris Ballard has zagged to height and, like we mentioned, athleticism. So when we're talking about height, we're talking about Jelani Woods, their 3rd round tight end draft pick, 6'7". Mo Alley Cox, re-signed tight end, 6'6". Depth wide receiver Mike Strahan, 6'5". Michael Pittman Jr., 6'4". Des Patman, 6'4". Alec Pierce, the newly 2nd round draft pick at wide receiver, 6'3". These are big boys.
Yeah, I know 100%. You've drafted essentially a basketball team, and you're not only doing that, but you're But the interesting part is these aren't guys that are just tall. These are guys that are tall that have a history of sports that requires body control, jumping ability, and having that hand-eye coordination. You look at Alec Pierce and his background in volleyball. That's something that I hear a lot of people talking about, is his body control and the ease he has in being able to jump for the ball, time it properly, and high point it. You see the same thing with Mo Alley Cox, college basketball background. Jelani Woods, I'm not sure. I want to say I've heard that he has basketball background at the collegiate level, but I could be wrong on that.
Ooh, I have a note in here as well. So we're not about basketball, but Jelani, just an absolute athletic freak. He played quarterback in high school, and then some wide receiver in college before converting.
Wow. Can you imagine him a wide receiver? Pretty sure the Colts actually followed him for a handful of years while he was in college. I remember actually hearing some press conferences from the scouts in the Colts saying that they were following him, and I think it was his 2nd or 3rd year in college, and he was still at wide receiver at that point. They looked at him and they said, "You're a tight end." and I think he converted, and then after that, the rest is history. But these are also guys too that, you see a big trend. Colts, I mean, we've seen this every year, Owen. They go for traits, not necessarily production. Alec Pierce, he has good production. Jelani Woods, not so much. That's maybe why he fell into the 3rd round. But you see all the potential. And you also see, these are players that are in college, it's hard to sometimes get that production based on the offensive scheme. So you see players that have those traits, they have that potential. And if you have a creative, offensive-minded head coach like Frank Reich that can utilize those players and those traits, then why not take them and get good value out of it, right?
Absolutely. And so I just wanted to rewind back to the traits. And that's actually a direct quote from Chris Ballard. I have it right here on the screen. Bet on high-end traits. And the note that I have in here, so Indianapolis drafted all of their prospects with a relative athletic score above 9.0. It's the first draft class in NFL history where all prospects drafted by an organization registered with that above 9.0 RAS. You've got Alec Pierce being rated at a 9.83. He broke the combine. Absolutely. Just an athletic freak. Jelani Woods has a 10 out of 10 rating on this scale. And then we move into the later parts of the draft. Sorry, still in the third round, actually. Bernard Raymond, he's our replacement, ideally at left tackle at a 9.87. And then Nick Cross was a 9.87 as well. But you can continue on through the draft class and look this up for yourself. Their entire draft class, relative athletic score, it's just all above 9. And we've just got some crazy athletes coming into this team. So looking at the draft class, I mean, we can start with Alec Pierce, but I mean, I feel like we almost want to discuss these first 4 picks because these are the ones that are going to make the impact on the Colts in year 1. Alec Pierce was the wide receiver drafted out of Cincinnati in the second round. Jelani Woods, we've mentioned, he was the tight end out of Virginia, drafted in the third round. Bernard Raymond, offensive tackle out of Central Michigan in the third round. And then we trade a next year's third round pick and a 5th round pick, I believe, this year to move up and select Nick Cross, a free safety out of Maryland.
Yeah. Pretty crazy. I think it's first draft I can remember in a while where we had 3 third-round picks. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they grow because I think Alec Pierce starting at the beginning of the draft in the second round, Alec Pierce is definitely a wide receiver that can contribute right away. You know, and the thing is too, we talk about his height and his athleticism. This guy can run. I mean, this guy's 40-yard dash. I don't have it on hand, but
4.41.
You could just watch his highlights. The guy is very good at getting off press coverage. That's a huge thing you see in the NFL that leads to wide receivers having good production in their first year. Route running is always something that's going to be a question with wide receivers coming out of college, just because I think college systems right now aren't asking them to get separation as much right now. And with how defensive coverages are and how many offensive plays they're running in college games, yeah, a lot of times you're just getting base defenses. So you're not really getting that like man-to-man. So that's typically, I think, why a lot of wide receivers have to improve on their route running. But I think the big thing to look at is that he can get off press coverage. That's really big. Apparently he did really good in the rookie minicamp too. I think you were hearing similar things, Ao.
Yeah, I mean, we were seeing almost daily reports that he was in the end zone just bringing down jump balls, and that's super exciting. So I got a Twitter opinion here from Sal Vetri. So noting that Indy took 0 of the consensus top 10 wide receivers, and I'm not sure that that's really like, you know, it's interesting when it's like the consensus top 10 wide receivers that Pierce wasn't included in that. Like, it's not necessarily something that I care about or we care about, because consensus, it doesn't mean anything after the draft. It's all about the fit in the offense. It's all about, after that, it's all about how you produce. Your draft capital helps you get targets and, you know, stay around on the team. But it's more of a point that just to note that Michael Pittman should be expected to continue seeing an elite target share. So 26% last year, he was in the top 12 of the NFL. So if we're going to segue back to just Pittman for a second, I think you're going to want to prioritize him in fantasy football drafts. Alec Pierce, can't say enough good things about how he's already looking and, you know, how excited we are. But Pittman, I think he's going to be almost a slam dunk wide receiver 1 coming up this year. And especially if you're going running back in those first couple rounds, then you're going to want to slam this draft button on Michael Pittman as your wide receiver 1. So moving back to Pierce, he got the second round draft capital. And if that was after the Colts trading back, so they were obviously very confident that they could have got him. And they passed on players that were more highly rated, like Sky Moore, who ended up going to the Chiefs, as if you're plugged in, It was interesting because I think they envisioned needing that outside piece. We're talking about the end zone jump balls. So we're hoping that Paris Campbell can finally be healthy in the slot. And it's notable that Pierce was a top 5% athlete to ever attend the combine. Josh noted his 4.140 speed and his burst, just absolutely quick off the line. But the one thing that I did want to note was it doesn't seem like he's got the agility that, might put him in the upper echelon of those metrics. But if you're looking for somebody to be, and it almost seems like he's that field stretcher, that big bodied field stretcher where he can go up and get the balls. Maybe the agility isn't, the biggest concern, but we've also seen players like Dalvin Cook recently where their agility score was really low and they turned out to be an excellent player in the NFL anyways. So that can't be the only thing that we're focusing on here. And Alec Pierce, actually, if we're going to turn our attention to fantasy, he's, according to Fantasy Pros, being drafted in the 18th round, which would be out of the range of most fantasy drafts. But as I mentioned, I was doing mock drafts last night and over the past week, and they've got him in the late 10th round. So what you'll hear on the next podcast with Anthony is kind of one of the strategies that I'm proposing for this year is you take a shot on one of these rookie or sophomore wide receivers, especially the rookies, because they're coming to the NFL more prepared. And especially an athletic freak like this, there is an huge opportunity on this Colts depth chart. And with these Colts targets from Matt Ryan, super accurate as we've heard, and somebody's going to need to score the touchdowns. It can't just be all Jonathan Taylor, as much as I would like it to be. But Alec Pierce, I mean, if you want to take a shot on a wide receiver breaking out, this could be a touchdown monster. This could be a hyper targeted member of the offense, especially if there's injuries that ravage the Colts wide receiver depth chart. Paris Campbell can't seem to score more than one touchdown per year because he has a long touchdown and then usually goes down with an injury, but you can see flashes from him. And I know, Josh, you draft Paris Campbell almost yearly in our fantasy football league. And I don't doubt that you'll be doing it again. And I'll be trying to as well as a late round value. So, I mean, there's definitely fantasy gold to be mined in this Colts wide receiver room. Pittman, obviously the notable one where he's being drafted high, but if you can take one of these sleepers in Pierce or Campbell, you're looking at a potential target and touchdowns, and you're looking at an interesting draft pick.
Yeah, and you're also seeing why keep drafting players that are with the same quarterback and have the same kind of targets. You have a whole new situation here with Matt Ryan. So I think that's an intriguing part of it too, as well, from my perspective. If I was potentially looking at taking Paris Campbell late in the draft, which I always do, because
we usually leave him for you, bud.
Right, just because he has so much potential, and he's one of those players where he just needs one season that isn't injury riddled. You're talking about a player that was completely healthy all of his college career, so it's the fact that he's had close to season-ending injuries each of his first 3 years. Is he going into his 4th year? Yeah, his 4th
former second-round pick as well.
Right. So the fact that he's had this many injuries is really unfortunate for him. But that he's one of those players with his speed and his playmaking ability. He just needs one season of opportunity and he'll explode. So now that, that's kind of what you look for in your sleepers too. That's kind of why I take him. But in terms of the wide receivers, I think Alec Pierce as well, you're going to see a lot of double coverage for Michael Pittman. That's going to give some opportunities for Alec Pierce, especially with Michael Pittman last year topping 1,000 yards, hitting career highs and touchdowns and yards, receptions. So you're going to see defenses catering to him a bit more. And I think his growth this year is just going to further implement that. So you'll see more targets for Alec Pierce. And yeah, I think with someone like Matt Ryan, you're going to see better ball placement than you did with Carson Wentz. And therefore, you're going to see a lot more wide receivers catching the ball in stride where they're going to be able to get a lot more yak, right? So that's another reason why you feel good about a player like Paris Campbell.
Absolutely. So if I think I can put a bow on our sort of analysis of the wide receiver room, Michael Pittman, I think, is a player that you're going to want to target. I think I've said that multiple times, but I mean, I just want to hammer it home. You definitely want to grab him at the start of your drafts, that third, fourth round. But I think in terms of Alec Pierce, I think he might be one of the ones that you might want to wait on. Like, sure, he could explode week one. I mean, I'm not telling you not to draft him, but with his current value, if we're seeing him in the 10th round, and now by draft season, that might mean he might be moving up to 9th, 8th round. I don't think that's where you want to be taking him. I think you want to wait until somebody drops him because he's not getting the targets that you want. Because like Josh said, you're going to see week one. I bet you the target leader obviously is going to be Michael Pittman, but I can almost bet you dollars to donuts, if that's the saying, that Paris Campbell is going to be right behind him as target number 2, and everybody's going to be rushing to the waiver wire. So we're giving you tomorrow's news today on the 1-0 Fantasy Football Podcast. But now we're going to segue to the quarterback and to the running backs. I know everybody's dying to hear me talk about Jonathan Taylor more, but I just wanted to include one quick quote from Matt Ryan, or about Matt Ryan, before we move into the running backs. So a quote from my favorite player of all time, Reggie Wayne, our new wide receivers coach. He was quoted saying, "It makes me almost want to throw up because he reminds me of Peyton so much." And if we rewind back to Josh and I's first podcast, Josh was talking about his desire for a more anticipatory, a pocket passer with a lot more accuracy. And that seems to be exactly what Josh got. And that makes us excited for the wide receivers, but it also makes us excited for the running backs. Our top 2 running backs are pass catchers. They're both very talented in that realm. And recently, Frank Reich was even quoted as saying, you're going to want to draft Nyheim Hines in fantasy football. Those of you that own Jonathan Taylor or will be drafting Jonathan Taylor with your first or second overall pick, don't let him fall to 3rd. That might strike a little bit of fear in there. But I mean, Jonathan Taylor is still one of the most talented, if not the most talented running backs in the NFL. We've seen it, the breakaway speed, you only need one run. So you should not be fading Jonathan Taylor, but it's just a note that maybe both of these running backs could hold value. We don't have a rushing quarterback here in Matt Ryan, especially at his advanced age. He's going to be dumping off the ball akin to Phillip Rivers a couple of years ago, where Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines were getting a lot of passes out of the backfield. So Jonathan Taylor, definitely still that top 2, top 3 pick in fantasy, but I think you want to start targeting Nyheim Hines later in drafts, especially if you're doing 0 running back. If you're not taking any running backs early, God forbid if there's an injury to Jonathan Taylor, Nyheim Hines would step right in and he would be a running back 1.
Yeah, absolutely. His ability to run, I'm trying to think of the term, but basically right behind the offensive line, like through the middle, and as well as going around the perimeter. He's got obviously wide receiver ability. I think you actually see that too with Nyheim Hines in the OTAs this year. You hear a lot of the assistant coaches, as well as Nyheim Hines himself, saying that they have him doing reps at wide receiver. He's going to be getting a little bit more opportunity, I think, in the slot, which is something that is kind of a wild card with running backs. So I think that could give him opportunities. That also means that there's opportunities for him and Jonathan Taylor to be on the field at the same time.
Correct.
We've talked, Owen, before about having that shotgun formation with Nyheim on one side and Jonathan Taylor on the other. And what does that do to defense? That really perplexes things, because what are they going to do? There's so many opportunities with those two guys. They're both so talented and multifaceted. So I think running back is definitely a good position for the Colts. And I think it's a big change and a good change for Matt Ryan compared to the running backs that he had at Atlanta.
Yeah.
So I think Matt Ryan, you're also going to see Matt Ryan's value and, the emphasis he puts on running backs bringing their value up as well.
Yeah. And normally with a couple of recent running back signings as well for the Colts, that might be a bit of a red flag for the starters there. But it's just nice that the Colts are prioritizing their running back depth. We lost Jordan Wilkins to the Titans halfway through last year, and the depth needed to be restocked. So we brought in Philip Lindsay, a former undrafted free agent 1,000-yard rusher from the Miami Dolphins and formerly of the Broncos, and brought in Tyson Williams, who was thrust into a starting role last year with the Ravens. So some good depth there, but make no mistake, Jonathan Taylor is still your number one pick in fantasy football drafts. And Nyheim Hines is still going to hold some crazy value. Josh made an excellent point about them both being in the backfield. And there were even instances where Taylor was lining up at fullback and getting the ball, or, the fake to him and then giving it to Nyheim. So you're definitely going to want to get pieces of this backfield. And the offensive line is where we want to segue to next, because there was a significant investment there as well. So you still have the strength of the Colts offense in their offensive line. Maybe you've taken a couple of steps back with, the retirement of Costanzo, but you've still got Braden Smith on the right side. You still got Quentin Nelson at, left guard. And you've got Ryan Kelly, very important for the running game at center. And then we're going to have Danny Pinter filling in at right guard. Might not have been what we wanted personally from the right guard position. We had Chris Reed, who ended up going to the Vikings. He was an excellent find. And Mark Glowinski, both of those guys, I think, were like undrafted free agents or, late round guys or anything like that really solidified that line. But Pinter was drafted for a reason. And then we have the entrance of Bernhard Raymond, where he was our 3rd round pick, drafted ideally to solidify that left tackle position. But we've also got Matt Pryor, who replaced
Braden Smith when Braden Smith was injured last season.
Right. Matt Pryor, who has filled in for Braden Smith at times at right tackle, but also replaced Eric, the ghost of Eric Fisher last year. So I know you've done a lot of reading and research on Bernard. He's an amazing story. So I'm just going to let you kind of roll with that, Josh.
Yeah. I believe he was you're looking at an athlete that's coming from Europe. And I don't mean to lump all European athletes that are coming over in the same kind of pool, but you always see this level of appreciation and just like happy-go-lucky attitude. Like, I can't believe, because typically they aren't playing this sport at age 8, right? So you have these players. I think Bernhard Raymond started playing in his teens, and then, before he knows it, he's getting drafted into the NFL. So I think this is a guy that was obviously drafted for his traits. You see a lot of athleticism. You also see a guy that was not a left tackle for very long. I'm pretty sure he was a tight end before. You see highlights of him when he was a lot leaner, and then pretty sure he made the position switch to left tackle, and then COVID happened and he had to take a year off. So I think he's a little bit older coming into the draft. I think he's drafted at age 25, I want to say, or 24. So he's a bit older, but you're also looking at a player that doesn't have as much tread on the tires because he came into the sport at an older age. So, you take from that what you will, but I think he's definitely has the traits, and 24 years old. Yeah, that's how old he was. And he has the traits to be a good left tackle. I think right now their focus for the Colts is to just get the best 5 on the field. So, it really was too bad when Chris Reed was not retained, because I thought he did such a great job filling in for Quentin Nelson at left guard. But I think we have seen, it's rare, but we have seen this from the Colts where they're going to trust their gut. They're going to trust who they draft. Yeah. And Chris Reed, he played great, but I think Danny Pinter, he was a 4th round pick, 5th round pick. Anyways, they really believed he was going to be an answer for them at guard at some point. You saw him fill in at center for Ryan Kelly a couple of games last year, and he played pretty well in those games. You literally I don't think you saw a drop off at all. So, and that's saying a lot, because Ryan Kelly is a heck of a center. So, I think they basically were saying, we had a good opportunity, but we also know what we have in Danny Pinter. We can't afford. We already put so many resources into our offensive line. I think retaining Chris Reed would have just been more resources. They know how much they're going to have to pay Quentin Nelson at some point soon.
Yeah.
So, I think it was the right decision, but it was a hard one because, you obviously wanted Chris Reed to stay. But I think Bernard Raymond, the outlook for him is potentially getting a crack at left tackle at some point. I know Matt Pryor right now is seen as the starter and he's going to get the first attempt, but I wouldn't be surprised if Bernard Raymond by end of the first quarter of the season is maybe starting.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised, but unless he takes a monumental leap and really overtakes it in training camp, there's a chance of that. But Matt Pryor isn't any slouch either. That guy, he played pretty well as well at both tackle positions.
Absolutely. So I guess the takeaway from a fantasy perspective is that we're placing emphasis on replacing the positions along this line. We didn't even mention Dennis Kelly. He was a backup tight or right tackle for the Packers, and before that, the Titans. So he's brought in as a backup tackle as well. We've got Will Fries, a guard / tackle that was drafted as well. So the takeaway for fantasy is that, like Josh said, the best 5 are going to start. And this was per PFF was the 12th rated offensive line last year. And I would project them moving back into the top 10 as soon as, and if Raymond kind of hits the ground running, and if Pryor actually, is that replacement at left tackle. So they're going to do what they got to do. And they're usually a very good unit working together. Now, I know, Josh, we got to get you out of here. It has been a very productive chat, but I would be remiss if we didn't at least touch on the fact that, did you see that walk by? Was that a Gilly lock? Oh, Stephon Gilmore signed to the Indianapolis Colts. We got ourselves a cornerback.
Amazing. Gilly Lock. Yeah. Couldn't be more happy about that because he just solidifies that secondary, right?
Absolutely.
I think you're also in a place with the secondary that you don't have to completely lean on him because you have some players established there. You have Isaiah Rodgers, who's emerging, I think. You have that other quarterback that I can't recall his name, but he's someone that came over from our defense, the new defensive coordinator.
Are you talking about Brandon
Faison?
Faison, yes.
Yes, Brandon Faison. I've heard good things about him too. You obviously have Kenny Moore there as well. So I think it's a good shot to take, and you got him for pretty good value late in free agency.
Yeah. And we're talking about the secondary now too. So, and even the Colts as a defense for fantasy football as well. So we've made some big strides in rebuilding this defense. One of the other notes that I wanted to just touch on quickly as well was that we had some injuries to Julian Blackmon and Kari Willis, our starting safeties last year. And I mean, at this point, it's almost comical because it seems like they panicked and really restocked this where we only need 2 to 3 starting safeties, especially with this cover 2 shell that everybody's kind of moving towards in our sort of zone defense. But we brought in, Rodney McLeod, Armani Watts, and now traded up for Nick Cross. So, I mean, we've really restocked this safety and cornerback room in the secondary.
Yeah, I lost count after we got Rodney McLeod. I was just like, okay, so we're bringing in a lot of veteran free agents in the safety position, which is a good call. I mean, you have 2 pretty young safeties in Kari Willis and Julian Blackmon, especially just because of his injury history. So he hasn't had a whole lot of time on the field. You see the talent and the ball skills. There's no question about that. He's honestly, if he's healthy, I think he'll be in the conversation for one of the best young safeties in the NFL, just because his talent level is through the roof. Julian Blackmon, did they trade up for him?
They did. It's kind of a similar story to Nick Cross, like we talked about. He was traded up for, and also speaking of the defensive backs, we traded Rock Ya-Sin, who I actually projected the Raiders to take because they're heading to Sin City. You got to have Rock Ya-Sin. Traded him and got Yannick Ngakoue, who's really grumpy about being traded from the Raiders. So this defense is really shaping up to be something special this year. And I mean, that's going to lead to more opportunities for the offense and just a really exciting year. So I mean, I hope everybody learned something. Josh, thank you for your time. Much appreciated. Let's get you out of here. But what's the brunch order today? Hit me with that, and then we'll hit it. We'll head our way out.
I'm not sure. I've never been to this place for brunch, but I'm probably just going to go with Old Reliable, get whatever's on the menu that has the most food on the plate.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're looking for some pancakes, sausage, ham, maybe some hash browns. Yeah, that's probably where I'm going to be leaning. I might have to take a good look at the menu because I've never been there before, but brunch is great no matter what. I'll probably get some fruit or something too. We'll see. I'm sold.
So how about everyone else? Let's all sign off for the day. You've listened to a great podcast. Let's go hit some brunch. I'm going to go hit brunch and edit this podcast. We out.
Everybody, we're done here for today. You're gonna want to listen to the next episode of the official 1-0 Fantasy Football Podcast. Odog, out.
Welcome to the outtakes. All right, let's hit it.
Oh yeah.
And then that would mean that, what's his name?
Are you thinking of the offensive coordinator?
Yeah. Oh, coffee, muffin, donut. Oh, you ready to go, buddy?
Yeah. Let's do it.
All right.
Let's hit the road, Jack.
And don't you come back. My focus is lacking this Sunday morning.
Odog, how you doing, man?
So I don't know if you heard the outtakes of me and my dad's too, but we spent about 25 minutes imitating the recording has started and then theorizing that like there could be like another weird voice that comes in and goes, you guys are taking too long. Just get to it.
It's just like, hurry up, please.
You talk way too much.
Yeah, it's like, this does not take this long normally. That's funny.
What the what?
You've drafted essentially a basketball team, and you're not only doing that, but you're you. But the interesting part is
the end. Poof. Owen was gone.